simple answer, again, which I repeat from Tuesday, is everything is relevant. And we have had clear legal guidance on that matter, and it is also commented on in the LGA report. And again, we've heard about school place planning areas this evening. And as I said on Tuesday, I get that criticism. It's well founded, but the use of the place planning areas here is the presentation of data. We have undertaken a whole island exercise, and the recommendations, the selection, the consideration has not been influenced by those areas. They are there merely as a tool to present data. Indeed, we did at an early stage in this process say, should we actually undergo an exercise in redrawing the place planning areas? But it was felt it would be a waste of time and effort. There are more important things to do. I would also emphasize the point, again, apologies, no apologies for the repetition. It's important to make this point. Any potential future or alternate use of the sites is not relevant to these decisions. In response to a question, I referred to that additional set of data that was provided to members of the Cabinet following a further assessment of responses that shows an analysis of were any of those responses affected or affected significantly by the potential for an alternate use that may have been had in mind by the writer, and as is clear from that, no significant difference to the responses, be it positive or negative, seems to have been made from that. I would lastly say that we must also be cognizant in relation to all the schools of the impact, quality impact statements, that have been produced and are attached as appendices to the report. Again, those have been read, and I don't trust, but I will turn to members to confirm that the content of those has been taken on board in the process we're going forward into. Again, Chair, I look to you. I can pause or I can turn to the first of the schools.
I would like you just to read the corporate scrutiny recommendations, please.
If you let me have them, I'll read them.
I'll read them. The recommendations to this Cabinet from corporate scrutiny are that this committee urges the Cabinet on Thursday tonight to convene a full council as early in January 2025 as practicable to allow all members of the Isle of Wight Council an indicative vote on the school place planning proposals, and that should be followed on the same evening by the Cabinet, who should have cognizance of the vote of full council and make their legal and executive decision. I have spoken to that earlier to Councillor Brodie, and I hope that is that's noted what corporate scrutiny have asked us to do, and more than noted, we are in compliance with that. And the second second recommendation was that irrespective of what comes out of the full council previously mentioned, and an indicative vote, that Central Rural has educational provision in some capacity, and Cabinet looks at whether that is through an amalgamation or revisiting an alternative proposal, and that the Chillerton letter is more heavily weighted in discussions as it is at the moment, and we will take that into account in the next coming minutes and half an hour, I guess.
Thank you, Chair. So the first school I would like us to turn to.
Chair, there are some general questions I would like to ask before we go into. Are we going to individual schools discussion now? I would just be
I think this is a generality, but let's have a general question now because we're moving on to specific schools and it would be slightly different. So general questions now.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to do just a quick introduction to sort of my thoughts around this this whole issue that we're dealing with. And it is exactly as Councillor Bacon and others have said, it is all to do with the quality of our children's education. I too was very impressed with the LGA report. I think anyone gets a chance to read it should read it because you've got a breadth of experience there and a breadth of vision over the whole country of a very, very good organisation that are linked into government as well. But when you read something like there are 153 local educational authorities in England. Ireland primary schools were placed last in 2022. Well, any one of us 39 councillors must feel a great knot in their stomach when they hear that. And we're not moving anywhere fast off that. So we have to take action. And as the report also says, and Councillor Bacon says, a very, very complex situation that we're dealing with, that we're trying to address, try and lift our children out of this this place they're in, so to give them the better outcomes in life. So this is just one part of that, and that's why I'm sat here reading this, listening, taking on board everything, but at the forefront of my mind, it's us being last. It's just unacceptable, unacceptable. Sorry. My own child went through the 3-tier system when it went from 3 to 2-tier. They were caught up in that. It was unpleasant. I myself went to 6 different education institutions before the age of 11. So I understand this very, very keenly indeed. But I have to keep coming back. It's about our children's education. The child has got to be the centre of this. We've had a letter from the schools. In 22, I believe it was, another letter this summer, but they're saying you've got to do this because we have with the method that this must be done. None of us, we don't volunteer, go, yeah, we'll do that. No, it's because we have to do it because of the legislation around it. In that letter, of course, they say, yes, you must do it, get on with it, but also they caveat that, of course, each school will defend their own school. Of course they will. And I'm pretty sure that not in any of the consultation, there wasn't any school that volunteered to go through this either. So we're in a very, very difficult situation. So all we can do is follow the procedure to the letter, listen, read, and just use the best of our ability with our professional staff and as a group of people that are doing the right thing for our children's outcomes. That's where I'm coming from. I've got two questions. They're specific questions, but general questions, if I may. It's about the travel to school. So there's a few things. I think in most of the individual schools reports, it talks about travel to school if there is going to be going to a new school. So, for instance, in RIDE, it says it's recognised that longer journeys may occur. In the student voice, we heard from some children say, "I walk to school. I like to ride my bike." So it's quite a specific question, but I mean, for all the schools that may be affected, how are safe routes to school for pupils that won't qualify for homeschool transport? So if you're like under 2 miles, how will that be managed? And I don't know if Councillor Bacon, you can answer that specifically, but I'm more than happy if you want to, how you want to deal with that.
My answer would be that will very much be the aim of the Education Department to manage that. The specifics of how that would be done, though, I would look to officers to assist with.
Can you help us with that?
Shall I start? So the first thing I would say is that travel to school was something that's been raised by families since the earliest stage of the process. So when I refer back to the engagement events that happened back in April and May, and certainly travel to school, distance travel, how children were going to get to school was certainly a topic that came up on a very regular basis. And just to confirm what Councillor Bacon said, absolutely families would be supported with this. The big unknown, of course, is that because of the role of parental choice in this, until any decisions are made and until parents express their preferences for where they would like to go, there's a great deal of uncertainty about how that would play out. Because as we know, and you've seen a lot of information, for example, in the maps that you've had, and also there's a lot of data in tables in the reports, which shows the numbers of children by school, and whether they live within 2 miles of the school or further away. And what you'll see is that on a very regular basis, there are lots of families who live, more than 2 miles, and in some cases quite a significant distance away. So until we have more information about what the decisions are that are made, about how parents want to then exert their right to have that parental preference element of selecting school, it's very hard to know how that will play out. I'll hand over to Jade just on a few more comments on it.
Thank you. So yeah, I was just going to add that actually through the consultation process, that was quite a strong voice in terms of the ability to walk, scoot, cycle to school, and actually what would we do to support that going forward if there was proposed changes. And looking through a number of schools across the island actually, and looking at school travel plans, I think that's something that we recognise that actually not all schools have them, or if they do have them, they're not fully implemented. And so going forward, that's something as a local authority we need to be pushing forward with and supporting. And absolutely, if there was any proposed closures, that would form a part of that in terms of looking at where we can promote that travel and what we would need to support those children and families.
Just got one more question, if I may, Chair, then can move on. So my second question relates to the whole issue of the academies, and obviously extremely frustrating situation indeed. However, we are completely stuck with that situation, as is laid out very clearly on page 82 of our packs. And also there was the latest letter from Dame Kate, which I think is on 1357 if you want to have a look at it. So very helpful letter there, spelling out the situation we're in, and it's not going to be moving anytime soon. So given that, and given there's much frustration around this, but also given we have to still, as we've heard, they have a duty to be reasonable and talk to us. But how are we going to have these academies as part of the ongoing island conversation about improving educational attainment?
While they're working out who's going to say something, we have the indication the law is likely to change, but we don't know when that's going to be. That is the hope.
So in my experience of working on the island, the island school community is together in the need to improve outcomes for children. And that is regardless of whether they are an academy school or a maintained school. And we continue to work with the whole school system on the steps we're taking to improve outcomes for all children and to develop the education strategy. So from that perspective, and the role of the local authority, the statutory duty the local authority has to provide high quality education standards, we will work with all schools to improve standards, whether they are an academy or a maintained school. I think one of my colleagues might want to add some detail about some specific discussions we've had with some specific academies that relate to this.
Thank you, Ashley. So we do engage with all of our school communities and work very closely with them, and have built stronger relationships with, say, Northwood Primary School Academy through this process, and have engaged with their chair of governors and the head teacher there. And they have made a statement within the submission around their desire to work more closely with us should their position change financially or due to educational standards and pupil numbers. So we are actively involved in that conversation, and the same can be said for DCAT and their primary schools on the island too. DCAT is the Diocesan of Chichester Academy Trust, and they run Lanes End, St Blasius and St Francis.
Thank you.
Very quick supplementary. In the letter we got from the schools in the summer, there was 34 schools named that to basically tell us to get on with this process. Were the any of the academies? I mean, because we don't know who signed it. Okay, thank you.
Just before I
Well,
ask, I'm going to move to ask Laura's wants to ask a question. Can you remind us of the letter from the head teachers that asked us to act on education? How many head teachers signed that, please?
The number of head teachers that signed it on the last letter, it was from the head teachers executive, and there was 34 head teachers. It must be added that some head teachers oversee more than one school, so they would be representing the voices of more than one school on the island.
Just repeat that number.
34 head teachers.
34 head teachers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the people up in the balcony, all those people that have written in. I have read everything that's been sent in, over 3,000 pages, and it's been an absolute heartbreaking listening and having to deal with all of these issues that have arisen. I would just say that as leader, when I was leader, and we paused this process, I wanted to go and meet with the head teachers ASAP. I needed to see and hear from them. They left me in no doubt whatsoever that we were not to stall or delay. And I really can't say how strongly they made that known to me. So I know there's a lot of people that want this delayed, but believe me, those head teachers left me absolutely knowing that they wanted us to move ahead with this. What I would say is, and I desperately need a bit more reassurance, really, and that's about the special educational needs. I note that the head at Brading really seems to completely get SEN. You've only got to read some of the documentation that we have to see, and I know Oakfield has a big SEN. So I need some reassurance, please, that the transition for these special needs pupils, I'd like to know a bit more how that's going to be managed, please. Thank you.
Ashley, please. Thank you.
I'll start and then I'll hand over to Heather, who leads on strategic improvement around special education needs and disabilities. So if you look at the data, and this is included in the self-assessment that we've developed with colleagues across the system, including our colleagues in the National Health Service, on provision for special educational needs on the island. There's some very stark data in there. It refers to the similar data, which is quoted in the LGA review that Councillor Bacon has already talked about and others have spoken about too. But it also talks specifically about the progress and outcomes achieved by children with special educational needs across the whole island. And it breaks the data down by those who are registered as SEN support on schools and those who have an education and healthcare plan. The performance of those children is actually even more of an outlier than the total cohort. So whilst it is absolutely true that there are some centres of real excellence across the island school system around supporting children with special education needs and disabilities, as a whole, the outcomes of children who have special education needs and disabilities is even worse than the overall cohort. So improving outcomes for children, all children, is the key focus of the education strategy. But within that, we're also absolutely focused on supporting those children and young people who have additional needs, including those who have special educational needs, whether or not they have an education and healthcare plan. So as we drive up education standards on the island overall, the beneficiaries of that will include those with special educational needs and disabilities. And our aim will be to reduce the very significant current gap that exists between progress of children with SEND and progress of children without SEND. So that's the first general point, and it links back to the point that Councillor Bacon made earlier about the education strategy and how this is a key component of that. The second thing I'd like to say is that in the submissions that we've had, over years from chairs of governors and from head teachers that you referred to, Councillor, about the need to get on with this and take decisive action. One of the things at the heart of that is that they say to us they do not have the resources to invest in the sort of specialist provision that these children need. And by realigning the numbers of school places we have with the numbers of children we have, we will deliver an education infrastructure which is more appropriately structured and better resourced, so that the money that head teachers and governing bodies have to spend can be more effectively targeted on improving provision rather than spending on the infrastructure that they have at the moment. So the proposals in this report absolutely align with making the system so that the head teachers and governing bodies have more money to spend on improving the quality of education for all children, including those with special educational needs. The third element of this is around, or you asked about transitions, and Heather will talk a bit more about this, but from my perspective, absolutely, children with special educational needs very often do need additional support around transitions. And we already work very closely with early years providers, with primary schools and secondary schools to support children through that transition process. And that's not just about the local authority doing that. A lot of that process is actually driven by schools themselves. Schools organise sessions, for example, where secondary schools come together with primary schools in the summer term before children move from year 6 to year 7, where they share information about children, that they share the needs of those children, they share strategies that work with those children, and they work together on that transition process. So although if schools do proceed and schools are closed, there are some key principles around colleagues in the one school and the other school working together on this, about sharing information, about planning. We've heard from the public gallery earlier about the tight time scale with this. If decisions are made in end of February, beginning of March time, we do believe that does allow enough time during the summer term for colleagues in the different schools to come together to share information about schools about children, and to plan for that move that would happen in September. And actually, I know I was talking to one of the cabinet members earlier about some of the things that children had said in their submissions, and they were talking about the anxiety that they experience about this. And that is really useful information to understand, because children have told us about the things that make them anxious about this process, and that will allow the experts that we have in schools, and there's a lot of expertise in schools, together with the specialists we have within the council who can plan around this, because the whole transition around this, and it is children with special educational needs, it's also children who do not have special educational needs that need to have their needs met and to be managed through this process. I'll hand over to Heather, who might want to add some more detail.
You've answered quite a lot and provided detail, but what we would look at the individual children, certainly those with education healthcare plans, and robustly plan with parents and school to identify what support may be required, and that would be very much individualized to each child and each family, because needs could very much differ. There is an expectation potentially for a number of those young people that they will move well and transition well with the support in place, but for some we know that they would probably need a bit of a more detailed package of support around them, and not just for those with education healthcare plans, as Ashley said. We've got other vulnerable groups that schools have identified with us through the consultation process, again, that would need that coordinated approach. So children with social workers known to different stakeholders, we know that transition would be tailored.
the quick supplementary, and that is, Heather, do you have enough staff to be able to make this happen, please?
So it wouldn't specifically sit with the statutory team, the SEND team that would manage education healthcare plans. They would work with the schools. So we would absolutely have the resource and the commitment from our statutory team. We would then work with schools to look at what that looks like, and should we require, you know, additional support, then I'm sure we've absolutely been able to, across children's services, bring the expertise and work collaboratively. So there will certainly be support available to children, families and schools.
Lovely, thank you, Heather, because we're making a massive decision here, and I need reassurance about these sort of things. Just the final question, because I thought if we only ask 2 questions, depending at the early years provision, I noticed that we've got Roxall Robbins, they've got a good rating. What is going to be the provision for early years in those schools? How is that going to be managed? Bearing in mind government are trying to get more childcare places for people to get back to work. How is that going to work, please?
So you might be aware at the moment that the government are looking at school-based nurseries. So we are working with schools on the island at the moment in terms of if there is a need for expansion, then we are working with those schools to work with them to see if there's a need, then we will then put that into place. Across the island, we continue to do sufficiency assessments for all children, early years children, to make sure there is sufficient spaces across the island. So we will ensure that there is sufficient spaces across the island.
Thank you. Thank you all. Ian, do you have a
Well,
question?
I have, but I think we come. Hello? Yeah. Tom. See all the information about housing and noting in particular, and I will mention God's Hill because that's one that's coming up with some hopefully affordable rented housing in the God's Hill area. And so I'm looking at the way that you are doing your projections on the planning side, the pre-planning side, and obviously the opportunities that are out there with probably developable land. And also I was thinking about Ryde and the situation in Ryde, where we've got quite a few, and they're listed, and I thank you for that. And I see the working out that you've done and how you appropriately the number. But are we sure that that is going to be the number, or approximately the number that we can cope with if we start to close schools down? Thank you.
Yeah, so that's calculated based upon a yield that we expect from any development. That calculation has been done on the basis that every number of those dwellings is a 2-bedroom or more. And we know the likely reality of that is that some of those won't be. They may be 1-bedroom flats, or they may be assisted living, etc. But going forward, within all of the proposals going forward, we have a minimum of 10% surplus in the areas. And we've also, as you know, we've identified schools which could be potentially expanded should that ever be needed. It is something that we're really mindful of in terms of planned housing coming forward. Obviously, not only the sites that we know have permitted development, but those sites that we know within the island plan of potential development in the future. The fact and the reality is we have to work with what we have in front of us now, and always have a contingency for that. And that is the planning that we have and we have within that document. So it is understood. We work very, very closely with the planning department in terms of tracking and monitoring the housing trajectory coming forward, and also the build out rates and how those numbers are coming forward. Because as we know, numbers on the island, We used to have a model where we built all of the housing data into that model, and it skewed the figures because actually in reality those numbers didn't build out to the extent that they did. Some were faster, some were slower, or some were varied. And so we monitor that trajectory as they're developed. And that would be something that we would continue to keep and to monitor within our school place planning strategy, which would be, we have that in draft form now, but that would be reviewed on an annual basis.
Let's do one.
Okay, one more, and I'll forget the supplementary. But I'll catch you later about that. Mergers. Now, seems to me as the layperson, so to speak, although I'm very well educated, if you like, now in this whole process. Thank you very much to all the information that you've passed through to us and the discussions we've had. Can I just say mergers? Why are we against mergers for, shall we say, some of our schools? If you said Wroxall, Godsu and Arreton, and indeed other areas where we could possibly merge, and I really think that, you know, once you've got a structure in place, why dismantle it when you can actually pull them together and probably make them more efficient, and probably even utilize the spare places even better.
It's a really good question, and we looked at mergers. In some areas, merging schools that are already named together would not reduce the number of surplus places that we need to across the island. So we did actually say to all sorts of stakeholders, if you're going to propose that, it'd be helpful if you speak to other schools around that too, to identify whether that was going to be a viable option. But we need to make sure that we have the surplus places that we need to remove from the system catered for. So mergers as well also are closure, but just in a different name too. So when you move two schools together, you're either creating a new one, which obviously would have to be an academy, or you are closing one down and the other school is absorbing that.
Thank you, Ian. I am going to come a very quick, sorry, Karen, you asked a question.
Thanks for all the information that we've had today. I did have quite a few questions, but actually we've touched on those, so I'm not going to ask those. But we've talked about deprivation quite a lot, and actually listening to the public gallery that she spoke about mental health of our young. So I wanted, I know it's in the report, we'll touch on it, but I just want to know what are the plan or the wraparound services we're going to give our children going through the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll start and then I'll hand over to a colleague. So we're very conscious of the deprivation situation across the island and particularly within different communities. And there are a number of services that support particular families who are most subject to this, and particularly in the light of the recent cost of living crisis, etc. And we believe that if there are changes in the school system, that those services will be able to be moved to somewhere else or continue on the same site or delivered differently. But there are plenty of opportunities to continue with the provision of those services, for example, food banks, community pantries, etc. So we believe that they will continue to be able to be provided. We also believe that high quality education is one of the most important things in a child's life, and particularly so if they come from a more deprived background. So once again, this links to the overarching education strategy and the aim to improve outcomes for all children. Going to a high quality school that is delivering high quality education is hugely important for all children, and particularly those who come from an area of deprivation. So we believe that the education strategy and these key changes, which are fundamental building blocks for that strategy, will have a significant impact for all children, and especially those who come from a deprived background. I wonder if Naomi want to add some more examples.
So specifically, we've already touched upon it previously in different meetings around the Mind Happy Mind project, which is an NHS project which has been rolled out initially to the named schools and then to all of the schools across the Isle of Wight. And internally within our education department, only today we were securing and manoeuvring some of our staff around. So should the decision go ahead, we are going to create a transition manager role that will actually support the schools with the transition of pupils to work with parent, carers, community groups and all of the schools that, if should the decision be made, will close, and the schools that are receiving, so that would be a more seamless transition and security for families in terms of knowing the children's needs, working with those members of staff and leaders to ensure that they have the best possible transition through.
But can I just add one other point which relates? So it is true that in areas of deprivation, more of those children are receiving support from other agencies, including statutory agencies. So clearly within the council, we work with children who are on child and need plans and child protection plans. We know who all those children are. We know who all those families are. We know where they go to school. Those teams are and will continue to be involved in any changes that go on in those children's lives, including should they be moving school. So we will be including that element of it within any transition planning that happens.
Thank you.
So that transition will include all their mental health issues, etc. Yeah.
Deb, and then we're going to move back to Jonathan.
Just to follow on from that, everyone will be aware that we have just launched our poverty reduction strategy. And one of the tenets of that strategy is to ensure that all children have the best start in life and aid the foundations for a fulfilling and successful life, where happiness, education and health can aid them to prosper and succeed in the future. And the first one of the next steps under that principle is that we will work to implement the education strategy to achieve education pass rates that are better than the England average. Just to highlight that it's an all-island strategy that is already engaging with partners across the island that are already delivering. So I just want some reassurance that there will be that collaboration between yourselves and the our partners within the poverty reduction strategy moving forward. Thank you.
I can give you that assurance, and I'll give you one quick example. So, for example, we're currently working with the High Sheriff, who's providing some leadership around some of our voluntary sector organisations who are active in these communities, particularly youth groups. We're talking about having a conference for voluntary sector organisations, which we're aiming to have at the end of April, beginning of May. And that will be talking about how the council and statutory partners can work even more closely with the brilliant voluntary sector we have on the island, that we're extremely fortunate to have, because we absolutely recognise that they bring huge value to all our children, our island's families and children and communities. So absolutely, we already work closely with those voluntary sector organisations, but we intend to work even more collaboratively with them going forward.
Thank you, Ashley. Jonathan, I'm going to come back to you and move forward, please, with the some of the proposals.
Thank you, Chair. As I said a moment ago, I'll now turn to individual schools. And the first that I would ask members to turn to the papers for, which are Appendix 3, starting on page 113, in relation to Cowes Primary School. I would, however, ask you to remember and note that we received an additional paper in relation to this school for the correct equality impact assessment, which you should also have received, and I hope you've attached to your bundle. It replaces Appendix 15. Yeah. What I intend to do leader is to just review the content of the appendix. It's probably appropriate that I then pause for any questions relating to the specific school. And then I would suggest that I read in full the recommendation that in this case appears on page 133, and that I will then turn to look for a seconder at that point. The appendices are each created in the same rough format, but obviously cover different issues. If I turn to page 116, which summarizes the proposal that was consulted on, and that is for the closure of this school, and that would remove 210 places from the system, 30 places a year. The consultation process, which has been referred to, is outlined in the next paragraph. It was a 6-week process from the 20th of September to the 1st of November. And I think the material there we have all read and we are aware of. The responses to consultation are set out commencing towards the bottom, page 116. There are both objecting and supporting comments. The objecting comments are not separately summarized, but refer particularly to the impacts on the community as well as emotional and educational impacts, and also note the performance of the school. Positive comments appear thereafter, and the summary there is that the points highlight the potential benefits of the closure, focusing on improved education quality, better resource allocation, and long-term community benefits. There was a public meeting, 78 people attended that. It took place on the 23rd of September. We then have presented the online consultation feedback, pages 119 through 121. 286 responses, 30% were supportive, 66% were opposed to some degree. Again, the content of those responses is set out, this time on page 120 to 121. And I confirm, I think all members of the Cabinet have confirmed they've read all that documentation. And I think we should make that clear that we have been busily reading this stuff for some considerable time. There were 28 email responses. Also, formal responses were received from the ward councillor, the town council, the head teacher, the governing body, and there was a joint response from the 4 trade unions affected. There was also a petition, as with most of the schools, this one containing 479 signatures. Alternative options were suggested. It has been commented on a number of times that these have not been considered in this process. That is not correct. As you'll see, starting at page 123, these are listed and then discussed in detail with the merits and demerits set out. Option 2 suggested a phased closure, but it was felt that would create significant problems. Options 3 and 4 both required the local authority to have authority over academies, which, as we've said a number of times, it does not have. Indeed, the academies issue was certainly, in going through the responses, one of the key issues I picked up, a lot of people talking about that. The report also sets out the forecast data. The table we should perhaps have most regard to is that at the top of page 128, which shows the respective numbers. Again, for data presentation purposes only, we use the place planning area, but that appears at the top of page 128. And I think it's quite stark in what it shows. We have, as you will find, we have in all the rest of these reports, analysis of community, transport and housing impacts, issues of deprivation, SEN provision, and comments on the impacts on other schools. We must have regard to early years. The local authority has a duty to ensure adequate provision in relation to early years, but as noted on page 132, there are no concerns in this area. And lastly, there's a brief summary, of the equality impact assessment, which I've referred to and which I trust we have all read. I would also refer to the answer to one of the questions that was given earlier, question 71, which notes that in relation to the potential closure here, in collaboration with Gurnard Primary School, we are exploring various ways to accommodate additional pupils should this be required. This includes considering the provision of temporary accommodation at the Gurnard site and or utilising the existing Cowes Primary School site. The final decision will be made by the local authority in consultation with the Chair of Governors and the head teacher. I think that should be brought forward again at this point in the meeting. Leader, I would next go on to the recommendation and vote, but I think it's appropriate I pause there should there be any specific questions on this school.
Thank you for that, Councillor Bacon. Are there any questions at this stage?
Sorry, Councillor Bacon, could you just read that to me again, and or utilising the current site, please?
Well, you just recited it almost perfectly. Perhaps I could suggest that officers might be able to give a little more detail of those discussions that are ongoing.
So this is an example of where, until we understand, until after any decision is made, and until we have an understanding of what parents would like to do as a result of that, it's impossible to be completely accurate with identifying how many places will be needed. So, for example, if this proposal goes forward, then we don't know whether a parent will choose to go to Lanes End or Northwood or Gurnard, and we will work with families to enable their preference to be met whenever possible. But until we know what their preference is, which clearly we don't know now, we don't know how many places would be needed. The use of the other site, I'll hand over to Jade for, because it is one of the options which is being explored, depending on what parents choose that they might want to do.
It's not. I'm reassured that we have listened to what the parents and public have said there. Thank you.
Yeah, so that was something that parents raised, say, okay, could Gurnard utilise, could the children stay here and Gurnard oversee that? We need to continue that discussion with them to understand again, as Ashley said, what numbers that would be, what that would look like. Due to the close proximity of Cowes Primary School to Gurnard, we think that is a legally compliant and physically, but we would need to explore that further.
Apologies, jump in. At the start of this meeting, we said that the parliamentary candidates would be here and be representing us. Can we ask where Paul Fuller is this evening?
I'm afraid, as you can see, neither of the MPs are here and neither is Councillor Fuller.
Can we ask where he is, considering he's a member of this committee?
Who? Asking who? Councillor Fuller? I don't know. He's given his apologies.
Thank you.
Can we move on?
Thank you, Leader. If there are no other questions from around the table, I will read the recommendation. Again, I'm not making many apologies this evening. I make no apology. I think it important that the full recommendation, as appears on page 133, is set out before us and reads as follows. From reviewing and assessing all the information received through the consultation, the importance of Cowes Primary School is understood, as is the fact that this is strongly felt in the community. The council does not underestimate the potential impact of this proposed change on the children at the school, whose circumstances may already make them vulnerable. It has been recognised that the school and that its community stretches beyond the area the school sits within. Consideration has been made as to how children and families could be supported in any transition so that the sense of community could be given the chance to be maintained. It is expected that this will happen through the scheduling of opportunities for children and families to come together through and beyond the transition phase with the support of the Council's Children's Services Department. The closure of Cowes Primary would reduce the number of surplus primary school places on the island and in the immediate planning area of Cowes. The council considers that allowing surplus places to remain at current level through inaction would directly and negatively impact the financial viability of many local schools, which in turn will have an impact on the quality and breadth of the education offered at those schools. Through the consultation process, concerns were raised around the fairness of the process and inclusion of academies in the school place planning review. The local authority and the DfE have jointly approached the two academies to consider their positions, and this is noted in the report. Mapping of children by postcode demonstrates that they reside across a wide area within and outside of the Cowes area, with only 65% of children in current year R to 5 attending the school as their nearest school. This means that families are very likely to have several alternative schools within the DfE recommended walking distance of their homes, i.e. 2 miles for children under 8, 3 miles for children aged 8 to 16. Children would be entitled to local authority funded transport if they are eligible under the home to school transport policy to what becomes their nearest school if Cowes Primary School closes. It is recognised that longer journeys to school may occur for some families living in the Cowes area if they take place at a school further from their home address. The council would work with schools who receive children from Cowes Primary School to develop their school travel plans to seek to mitigate against increased car use. And taking account of all that, the recommendation to Cabinet is that a public notice be published in accordance with Section 15 of the Education Inspection Act 2006 to close Cowes Primary School with effect from the 31st of August 2025. I make that recommendation proposal and I look for a seconder.
Thank you, Councillor Bacon. I'm looking for a seconder. That's Councillor Stevens has seconded that. I will go to the vote. I intend to ask those in favour, those who abstain and those who are against, even though that may become obvious as a matter of record. And I would just like to add that whilst I have further information, that whilst I cannot tell you the whereabouts of Councillor Fuller, I don't know where he is, I am told and informed that he has declared an interest in this matter because of family connections to the school in question, and therefore has chosen to not be present to avoid that conflict of interest. So I will move to the vote. We've had the recommendation. It has been seconded. Those in favour of the recommendation, please show. Thank you. Those who abstain. Those who are against. You haven't voted, Laura.
Yes, she voted in favour.
Sorry. Therefore, that recommendation is carried. Chair. We've indicated. We indicated, Councillor Brady.
Leader, perhaps if there is, we don't want any confusion in this matter. Should we take it
Should we
again?
vote again?
That recommendation, that there was indication from the two of us, that recommendation is carried.
Are we clear about councillor Brodie's question?
Indicated and it was noted.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Can we move on, councillor Bacon, to the next item?
Thank you, Leader. The next item, the next school, I'd ask you to turn to Appendix 5, which addresses Oakfield Church of England Primary School, commencing on page 165 of the bundle. It's a bit difficult here. The original proposal is set out at the top of page 168. The proposal was to close Oakfield Church of England Primary School. That would remove 420 physical places from the school estate and 210. Could I just finish the sentence, please? And that would be 210 based on the current PAN. This is also presented alongside a proposal to reduce the PAN for Greenmount Primary School from 60 to 45, which is part of this appendix as well. The consultation process, that is a standard paragraph. I will not repeat that again. Positive and negative comments were received, and these again are summarised, but I again emphasise that we have had the full bundle of comments to read through. Opposing comments, if I summarise those, they're not specifically summarised in the document. They mentioned the community impact and problems caused by the distance to alternative school sites. Supportive comments, of which there were some, talk about a number of issues, including the improvement of outcomes for children. I should again make that point that any potential alternative use of site is not part of the consideration, and we have had the revised figures which make that clear as to the impact. Those elements of the survey that we're not taking account of. There are also comments set out about the proposed PAN reduction that was consulted upon. There was a public meeting on the 26th of September. The attendance at that was 56. 56 parents, carers.
Excuse me, look, you really have been a well-behaved and engaging audience this evening, but we can't have you calling out to this. It's not, you've all had an opportunity to speak. We've appreciated and tried to understand and answer your questions. This is not the moment for you to interrupt this part of the process. And I would appreciate and ask you to please bear with us in this process. It's difficult enough for us, I can assure you.
With
There is
respect, there are
not one,
factual
there is not one
inaccuracies.
cabinet member in this room that is not heavy-hearted with the decisions in front of us. But please bear with us.
With respect, Chair, there are factual inaccuracies.
Please bear with us and allow us to carry on with the process. Thank you.
Leader, thank you for that. I'm more than happy to clarify. I've just had an indication across the room. 56 is the number of people who signed in. So that is the recorded attendance. The actual attendance may, of course, been higher where people did not sign in. And I would not dispute that for a moment. The online consultation feedback is summarised. I will take this through, go through this in the same way. The analysis in the document is that 304 responses were received, 39% were supportive, 59% were opposed. And again, there's a summary of that material appearing in the document. There were 48 email responses, all but one of which were in opposition. Formal responses were also received from the head teacher, the ward councillor, and the mayor of Ryde Town Council. And again, as referred to previously, a joint response from the 4 trade unions. There was an online petition that attracted the support of 1,258 signatures. Oakfield, as we know, is a Church of England school, and in that regard, there was a specific response, formal response from the diocese. That is detailed on pages 175 to 178. It starts at the very bottom, page 175, and then the content of that response is set out quite fully in the document. And again, we have seen and read that. In respect of the proposed PAN reduction, the responses are set out on pages 178 to 182. It is fair to say the response was mixed. As with other proposals under consideration, alternatives were submitted, and these are set out commencing at page 182. And they are again analysed merits and demerits, and that runs through until page 191, assessing each of those. As we've said, the fundamental issue here is the need to reduce surplus places in the system. And that obviously was a key factor being taken into account in assessing the alternatives proposed. Alternative option 5 could potentially achieve that aim. However, as set out in the demerit section, the proposal, a merger, presents serious difficulties, in part because the proposed school to merge with is already in a federation and there would be opposition from the Catholic diocese. Forecast data again appears, and that is on page 191 and 192. And again, that shows the picture predicted forecast for September 2028 in the last of those tables. The analysis again also presents, and people will have looked at, members will have looked at community impacts, which are given extensive consideration here, I think it right to say, housing data, issues of deprivation, SEN provision, and commentary on the impacts on other schools. I repeat again, there is a duty in respect of early years provision, and that commentary and statement appears on page 200, where it is noted that there are no concerns in that regard in this area. Lastly, and I think we noted particularly in this case, there is an equality impact assessment, which we will all have looked at and read. It is worth noting perhaps that many representations related to the potential for increased numbers due to housing developments, but as set out on page 197, the analysis is that there remains capacity to accommodate the numbers that may be generated from any such developments. I would also say that in reading through the material, much of it provided by the ward councillor, there was a particular concentration and concern expressed in relation to potential impact on deprivation issues. We are cognizant of that, and it is taken into account fully in the paper and the recommendation, which I will be seeking to read shortly. However, again, I think, Chair, I should pause there, save there is a piece of additional information, just noting the some points that were made in relation to submissions. I think I mentioned there was some concern about walking distance to alternative provision. But, and this might be something officers wish to expand on, there has now been discussion following those representations with Dover Park Primary School to consider the provision of an additional Key Stage 2 class for those children who would, if this goes through, for those children for whom that would become their closest school. I will pause there, Leader, and see if there are questions from any members or indeed the ward councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Bacon. I am now allowed to, I'm going to bring Michael in first, then come to this. So Councillor Lilly, thank you for your patience. As ward councillor, I hope you can hear me. I don't, here we are. Councillor Lilly, thank you for your patience with us on this. You are the ward councillor, and please speak, ask questions, and say what you need to say to us.
Thank you. First, can I apologise for not being there? I'm not there because I recently had an operation, and even though I can speak, my body doesn't move very well at the moment. It's still in recovery, so that is why I'm not there, Chair. Otherwise, I would be. I have, obviously, I'm totally against the closure of this school, and I put forward numerous arguments and information. And also, I do know the Diocese of Portsmouth is against this, as well as other local stakeholders. But I particularly want to concentrate my questions and my points around poverty, because the school serves what it says on the tin. It actually serves the Oakfield area, and as well as Elmfield, but particularly the Oakfield area, which is the south east part of Ryde. And Councillor Debbie Andre mentioned the other item on your agenda tonight, which is about the poverty strategy or anti-poverty strategy. And if you look at the map of that, the whole of the southeast area is covered in red, which actually means that it is in the 10% of the most deprived areas in the UK. And I think, and it is one school that just serves that community. And in that report, the words are quoted as saying, more understanding of people's long-term issues. For many, poverty, it has built up over time, and there is no short-term fix. That area, which has a huge number of social rented housing, particularly Sovereign and Southern, who are also opposed to this school being closed, has historically had generations of poverty. My question is, how can you argue closing Oakfield will not increase poverty and hardship? Why does the report actually fail to address this? Councillor Bacon, you said about the impact on communities. Well, I tell you, the closure of Oakfield is going to actually make a whole area poorer in any way, not achieve educational attainment.
Thank you, councillor Lilly.
I might want to ask a supplementary to that, but thank you.
Okay. Jonathan, do you want to have a go at answering that?
We are taking account of all the issues. The deprivation index is set out on page 198, and it says what it says. But there is an overall balance of considerations here, and perhaps I would respond by highlighting something Mr. Whitaker said a little earlier of the importance of high quality education for children who suffer from deprivation. And it is the case, I would submit, that taking steps to improve the quality of education for the island, and that means for the Ryde area, obviously as part of that, will be very important to addressing the issues that Councillor Lilly is rightly concerned about.
Thank you.
Can I ask a supplementary to
Yeah,
that,
of course you
please?
can.
It's national and international research on this issue of link of poverty to education says that actually to achieve education attainment, right, you actually have to tackle the poverty in the area. And any education authority that actually is in very poor areas have to have community development workers. They actually have to have a range of community centres and a range of initiatives that actually empower those families to actually enable their children to actually take part. What Oakfield has created is a community-based school that actually does a lot of that holistic work to actually do. It hasn't been able to do that until really till 2017 when it had the resources to do that. And what this proposal is doing is putting those children into porter cabins in parts of Ryde that are not part of their community, and actually put them into schools which are also struggling, are actually down for needs of improvement themselves. And I fail to, and I want to know, are you going to put the millions of pounds needed into that community, which you've ignored for years, by the way, to actually help those families be in a position to help their children to actually be able to go to school?
Thank you, Michael. Jonathan.
It is a very wide-ranging question that perhaps stretches more into issues that fall within the portfolio of Councillor Andre. My perspective in relation to education is the improvement of education standards and the importance that has in helping address issues of deprivation. I'm not in a position to comment on wider issues in relation to poverty, but from the perspective of that and indeed the wish to maintain all those elements of community support that the school currently provides, I can comment that there is obviously every intent to maintain and enhance that wherever and however possible. If an answer is sought on wider poverty-related issues, I might defer to my colleague here. But as I say, from the perspective of education, we come back to that situation where we have a situation on the island where we are at the bottom of the tables. We can't get any worse. We've got to get better. And we can only do that with a sustainable school estate where education and support for those children, whatever their background, however deprived or not deprived they are, they need the proper resourcing at school, which just simply isn't possible at the moment, certainly will not be possible in a few years' time with the continuing decline in birth rate and the current school funding system. And so that is why this painful action It may seem painful action, but the intent and overall aim is incredibly positive. That is why I'll be making a recommendation in that regard shortly.
Can I have one final point, Councillor?
Michael, I'll indulge you with one more question.
There is a link to the department because the Children's Services Department is actually active in the area for many of the families that go to Oakfield School who need that extra support. What support is going to be given to the many parents who might decide to home educate their children because they cannot get to other parts of the school? Many of the parents have actually clearly indicated this. And how are you going to reduce stop the number of children and families that are going to come into care, because that is highly likely if this school is closed, which actually costs you more money than actually you're going to save.
Thank you, Michael.
I think those are matters that I would actually ask Mr. Whitaker to deal with.
Thank you, Councillor, for your questions. If I may just respond to two things from the previous question, then I'll comment on the last question. So if you look at the children who attend Oakfield in the years reception through to year 5, 50% of them are not attending their closest school. So that's why in all the reports that members have seen, Cabinet have seen, you see an articulation and you see maps about where children live. So the fact is, according to our analysis, that 50% of children in years reception to year 5 who currently attend Oakfield, it is not their closest school. And so, again, as we've commented in the past, we don't know how this will play out in terms of the decision and then on where parents and carers will decide that they wish to attend after that. The point about intervening to support families, and actually this does link to the second question that Councillor Lee asked and also the third one. But the point about intervening in communities and with families, particularly around those families who are subject to most deprivation, is of course the council needs to have resources in order to do that. So whether the council is investing, directly in community support, or indeed whether the council is intervening through statutory social care services, it needs the finances to do that. And part of these proposals where we're trying to realign the numbers of school places to the numbers of children that we have is to create a more financially robust system. If we don't do that, this has very significant negative financial consequences for the council, and that will restrict our ability to be active in our communities where there is most deprivation and with those particular families who have particular needs. The most recently publicly available information about individual schools' financial information, and this is information which was published as part of July Schools Forum of this year, which shows a breakdown by school of their cash balances at the end of the previous financial year, of their forecast in-year cash flow, whether that be negative or positive in this financial year, and by combining the two of them, their forecast cash or debt position at the end of this financial year is shown by school, and it's been in the public domain since the summer. It's produced by schools. This is not the council doing this. These forecasts are produced by schools. Has Oakfield Primary School, with a negative in-year cash flow of minus £213,000 and a forecast at the end of the year of negative £325,000. Now, that is the latest publicly available information that is out there, and I have no reason to believe that that is not realistic. So in terms of the council repositioning the primary school system into a more robust financial health, and thereby its ability to support our communities and families where there is the most deprivation, we have to achieve a sustainable financial situation. If we look at it across the wider financial situation, the primary school system on the island this year, using the same numbers, is forecast to have a negative cash flow of £2.6 million. And that is a net number if you look at all the island's primary schools. Now, these are very significant numbers, and if they are not addressed, it will significantly impact the council's ability to deliver its wider statutory duties, whether they be adult social care or children's social care. And that's an example of the interconnection between all of this. And the last thing I would say on it, I would need to deal with electively home education, which I will do briefly. But in terms of the financial situation, it will, if we don't have the money in the council to deliver early intervention services and our statutory duties, that is going to lead to more significant issues. And we believe that by improving the quality of education standards in all island schools, that will be a very positive influence on children's lives and impact on those families who are most exposed to deprivation. Briefly, with the topic of electively home educated families, we have on the island not just the highest proportion of children who are electively home educated in the country, but a rate which is about 3 times the national average. We've done considerable work in understanding the reasons that families decide to electively home educate their children. And there's a number of different categories, and I think it's not helpful to consider that group in one, because the reasons that people decide to electively home educate is very diverse. And a few of them are these. So there are some families who choose from a philosophical perspective to electively home educate. And it's absolutely every parent and carer's right to electively home educate their children if they do. A larger group of families, according to our analysis, and this is based on asking families, why do you choose to do this? It's because their children have had an unsatisfactory experience in schools. Their needs have not, their needs have not been met. And as a result of that, they have taken their children out of school to electively home educate them.
I'm not taking questions. We're not doing it like this. Please, we achieve nothing by this. We are trying to get through this meeting, which is so difficult. I understand how emotional this is. It's emotional for us. It's emotional. We will do nothing with you calling from the balcony. Absolutely nothing. We will do nothing.
So I believe, thank you very much. I believe absolutely that it's every parent's right to decide to electively home educate their child if they do. I also believe that those families who in the past have chosen to electively educate their children because they have not been happy with the quality of education in not just their local school, but any school they've been able to access, they will be pleased to see improvements in education standards across the island. And we may well actually see a reduction in the levels in time of those families who are choosing to electively home educate, because there is undeniably a linkage between the quality of education and the levels of decision to electively home educate.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm going to move to Councillor Andre, then Councillor Seaton. Just before I do, that response was in response to a question from Councillor Lilly, who asked that question, which is why that answer was given. Councillor Andre.
Thank you, Chair. I'm currently chair of the Standing Advisory Council for Religious Education that actually monitors and supports religious education on the island. As a Church of England school, we know that there have been representations from the Diocesan Board of Education. But we also know with parental choice, and lots of parents do choose a school because of faith, and religion, as has been alluded to earlier, is a protected characteristic and is detailed in the equality impact assessment. But I would want reassurance that where parents choose to do so, their children, how will they be supported to continue their faith journey? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll start and then I'll hand over to a colleague. I want to just refer back to the very significant engagement which has existed between the council and the diocese on this point, and refer to the fact that in the school place planning board, which has been chaired by Naomi for some months, the diocese has been represented, and indeed not just diocese of more than one faith as well. And the consultation and submission from the bishop has been published as a separate appendix. We've also had a separate submission from the Diocese Education Board, which is included within the confidential packs, which you've all seen. And I know that's also been circulated more recently as well. And in the report on Oakfield, as it is for each of the schools, we've also had a summary of what the key points are in there. So I think the topics that have been raised have been well shared and well discussed. And I'm confident, along with other areas of this process, that the council will continue to act if proposals go ahead in accordance with its statutory duties around provision of education. And I'll hand over to a colleague for some more specific examples.
Local authorities in the UK are not required to provide faith-based education directly. However, we must ensure that there are sufficient school places available for children in their area, which can include faith-based schools. So obviously, if the decision is taken, we will work with families, as I said, with the transition manager to support families in those next steps.
Councillor Stevens.
I'm looking at the, I've been through this so many times, I'll tell you, but the preschool that is there, what plans have we to support if things move ahead with, with other procedures? What plans have we got for that? And then I want to come back just briefly, Chair, on the support mechanisms that are in place already through Oakfield School, which are quite amazing, really, when you look at the community groups involved with the school and the Oakfield Community Pantry, Little Acorns, and the community groups, etc. It's a big hub of activity there, which supports the community. And we need to, I'd like to see us investing more as a local authority, and I expect Councillor Lilly would as well. But I mean, the big thing is, okay, we need to support our communities. They do it well up Pan, I'll tell you that. I've been up at Pan Estate with Councillor Brodie and seen it first class working up there. Thank you.
Yeah, just on the early years point, we do believe that with regard to the council's statutory duties to provide sufficient early years provision, that those statutory duties would continue to be met if all these proposals progressed. But I'll pass over to Teresa, who is the early years lead.
In the Ryde area, we've got 5 private, voluntary, independent private providers, and then we've got 3 school-based ones. So if the proposal was to go through, there would be sufficient places on the island for the number of children. We also need to remember that there is a decrease in birth rate. So that will affect the early years settings as well, and those number of places that are available.
Sorry, just to add some further information to that. So you asked about the additional support services that Oakfield site provides in terms of the family hub, the HAF support, and the community pantry. There are many services that we recognise. especially going through the consultation process, certainly raise more that school provides in terms of support services to schools and families that work alongside that, and the wider community. And so going forward, if it was the recommendation to close the school, then we would be working alongside that to recognise what other services need to support us on that. So that could be internal agencies, that could be external agencies, that could be our household support team. And essentially there would be an investment needed from the local authority in terms of time and investment to look at what that provision would look like, to make sure that there wasn't any shortfall in provision by taking that decision.
Thank you. Are you okay? Jonathan, are there any from, okay, Jonathan,
Thank you, Chair. If you don't mind me making an observation, and I could make this observation, I'm sure, on all of the proposals that you're going through, but the very fact that those stakeholders, the head teachers, the chairs of governors, the parents and whatever, feel it necessary to shout from the public gallery because they hear information that they would want to debate and discuss, and that you are unable to take them, shows a weakness of this whole process, I think. And I recognise that you will probably,
Councillor Garrett, I might challenge that statement in that this has been a long process with a long consultation, and people have had ample opportunity to put their views. I'm not sure that I would accept that as a valuable
difference between a consultation which is summarised in an appendix and a discussion and a debate.
Councillor Garrett, I think
just need to bear that.
You were suggesting that people hadn't had the opportunity, which is why they were calling from the gallery. I don't think that's a valid comment.
But I would say the applause from the public gallery backs up my point. And I think you know me to be a very fair person, Chair. And I'd rather they didn't keep backing up my point, but you know me to be very fair. I think over whatever you choose to continue to do this evening, you need to recognise the enormous strength of feeling, and what I can see is people feeling that they've been shut out of parts of a process where they want to contest key pieces of information. They may not.
I'm sorry, Councillor Garrett, but this has been a long period. I really can't accept for you to say that. This has been a long period with consultation across a wide range. Our papers are so thick with some of that. And for you to say that people have been shut, for you to suggest that people have been shut out of this process is remarkable. Councillor Garrett, it's remarkable.
They feel shut out. All I'm saying is bear in mind. Yes.
Really, I'm sorry to have done that, Andrew, but that is unfair. That this has been an open process over a long period. We've had, as you've heard earlier, we've had our staff since February working on this day in, day out. There's been 6 weeks or more of consultations. There have been numerous. There have been numerous meetings across a whole range of organisations, of teachers, of parents. To say after all of that people have been shut out is absolutely wrong. We have really not going to allow you to shout down. I'm really not going to allow you to shout down from the public gallery like that. And I will have my say, and I will chair this meeting. I'm sorry that if you feel so emotional that you have to call out, but it adds nothing to this meeting and will do nothing to what transpires either. And I'm responding to a comment that I think is unfair, and it's unfair to our staff who have worked hard to include everybody in this process, not only to meet our statutory duties, but to go above and beyond that. And it's unfair to listen that people have been shut out of this. I don't believe that to be the case.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you for those comments, which I would like to support and underline, particularly in relation to the efforts that have been made to ensure this process is a valid one, conducted properly on the basis of correct information. Before moving to the recommendation, I would, because I think it is important, it has come up in a number of the consultation meetings, just like to pick up on that point about elective home education, because that's something that has been thrown around in a number of discussions. The figures were set out by Mr. Whitaker. It was interesting. There was a discussion on Radio 4 this morning, which talked about the increased incidence of elective home education across the country. And whereas we note here, there's a large proportion who seem to have taken that route because of dissatisfaction with SEN provision. Nationally, that was referred to as a small proportion. We're out of kilter there. And I come back to the point about improving quality of education, because part of that overall drive, which you can see in the education strategy, the draft education strategy, is the ability to deal with SEN provision in the mainstream. And that is something we have to work on. And I think that is closely linked to those figures we see. So I agree very much, and I've said this a number of times, that the overall moves we are making, I think, will have the benefit of greatly increasing inclusivity and reducing our elective home education numbers rather than assertions to the contrary. But that said, can I turn to the recommendation?
Before you move on, Councillor Jarman's indicated he'd like to ask a question.
Thank you, Chair. These discussions too often sometimes revolve around numbers. I feel comfortable with numbers, but there is a very strong emotive element to it. So I want to go back to some of the details that were covered by Mr. Whitaker and which he referred to in his paper. If we go back to the May 23 budget plans, they indicated an overall balance at the end of 23-24 was predicted to be 1.5 million. The actual figure, which was reported, was 4.2 million. So that does not give me a great deal of confidence in forecasting ability going forwards. And my question really is, given we are extrapolating on numbers which in the past have been over 200% out, what confidence does this council have in the extrapolated figures, which are in the most recent figure for the outturn of years going forwards? Thank you.
Yeah, please do.
Thank you, Councillor Jarman. The figures that I referred to earlier are the figures that schools themselves produce, and that they are the numbers that we have in order to consider the financial risk that's going on and to have an insight into the financial health of our school system. As I said, that they are the most recent ones. They are produced by our leaders in our schools and by those governors who are responsible for financing those schools. And they are the numbers that we have. And as I said, with the example that I used, I have no reason to believe that they are significantly different.
Sorry, I had an email from Jade Kemet saying I can only apologise for the error and the numbers will be amended when you talked about 13 preschoolers at Wroxall, where the number was actually 22. Sorry, I'll leave. Thank you.
Yeah, we can't have you intervening in this way. It's not how it works. We've extended to 2 hours the questions that you've been allowed. Every person has had the opportunity to ask questions. We are now at another process further in the meeting. It's no good shouting out. It does
Just wanted
nothing.
to highlight
It
that the
does
numbers were
nothing.
out. Thank
It
you.
does
Good night.
nothing shouting out. It does nothing. It will achieve nothing. If it becomes too unruly, I will close the meeting for a moment.
Thank you. Good night.
Ashley, perhaps you'd finish. Thank you. Back to you, Jonathan.
Well, I will speak for the recommendation, and as I did with the previous school, I will read in full what is on pages 200 and 201, so that everyone can hear the full information. From reviewing and assessing all the information received through the consultation, the importance of the school and support services provided to family in an area of the island which has high levels of deprivation is understood. Oakfield Church of England Primary School supports their families very well and provides for several additional provisions, such as the Family and Community Hub, Community Pantry, and enabling a provider to use the site to host the holiday activities and food programme. The importance of a Church of England school is understood, as is the fact that this is strongly felt in the community, which stretches beyond the area the school sits within. Consideration has been made as to how children and families could be supported in any transition, so that the sense of community could be given the chance to be maintained. It is expected that this will happen through the scheduling of opportunities for children and families to come together through and beyond the transition phase, with the support of the Council's Children's Services Department. The Council will also work with other schools in the area to ensure the family support services are not detrimentally impacted. The Council does not underestimate the potential impact of this proposed change on the children at school, whose circumstances may already make them vulnerable. The closure of Oakfield Church of England Primary would reduce the number of surplus primary school places on the island and in the immediate planning area of Ryde Town. The Council considers that allowing surplus places to remain at current level through inaction would directly and negatively impact the financial viability of many local schools, which in turn will have an impact on the quality and breadth of the education offered at those schools. Mapping of children by postcode demonstrates that they reside across a wide area within and outside of the Ryde Town area, with only 50% of children in current year R to 5 attending it as their nearest school. This means that families are very likely to have several alternative schools within the DFE recommended walking distance of their homes. Children would be entitled to local authority funded transport if they are eligible under the home to school transport policy to what becomes their nearest school if Oakfield Primary School closes. It is recognised that longer journeys to school may occur for some families living in the Ryde area if they take a place at school further from their home address. The Council would work with schools who receive children from Oakfield Church of England Primary School to develop their school travel plans to seek to mitigate against increased car use. The recommendation, therefore, to Cabinet is that a public notice be published in accordance with Section 15 of the Education Inspection Act 2006 to close Oakfield Church of England Primary School with effect from 31st of August 2025. The recommendation also states that in addition to this, the reduction of the planned admission number of Greenmount Primary School will be consulted upon next academic year in line with the admission code for September 2027. Leader, thank you for that. I look for a seconder.
Have a seconder. That's seconded by Councillor Jones Evans.
Microphone.
I'm sorry, I'll repeat that. That we'll move to the vote. Before I do, but I'll ask you, those in favour, those who are against and those who abstain. And before we do so, I will tell you that we will move to a 5-minute break after this, reconvene on 5 minutes. Those in favour of the recommendation, please show. Those against the recommendation. 7 in favour. Those recommendation, there are none. Those abstentions, there are none. That recommendation is carried. We will take a 5-minute break. Well, thank you and welcome back. I'll move straight on. The time is now 10 o'clock. So we'll carry on. Jonathan.
Thank you, Leader. As I explained a little earlier, we now have 4 schools to address that are grouped together in a way, although I'm going to go through each of them individually, because they are designated rural schools. And I wanted to take these in the second block because there are a few things I'd like to say before we go on to consider them. We must be fully aware, as I know we are, in this part of the meeting, in the guidance in the DFE document, the opening and closing of maintained schools, which is referenced in the main report at page 87, and indeed also in all the appendices I'm about to go through, which deals with rural schools. As has been quoted, and I think was mentioned on Tuesday a couple of times, the guidance sets out that there is a presumption against the closure of rural schools. It is, however, a presumption and not a bar to such closure if the case for closure is strong and clearly in the best interests of educational provision in the area. In that case, a proposal can be considered and carried through. There are a number of features to consider, in particular the size of the school, whether it puts the children at an educational disadvantage, the overall impact on educational standards, and the potential impact on other schools. As each of the appendices I'm going to present sets out, there are also other criteria to which we will have regard in making the remaining decisions this evening. The availability and likely cost of transport to other schools and the effect on journey times. Any increase in motor vehicle usage, which is likely to result from a discontinuance, and alternatives to the discontinuance, including conversion to academy status, federation with another school, or the scope for an extended school, which might provide local community services. It must be noted that the likely effect of the discontinuance, any discontinuance of a school on the local community is a key consideration we must bear in mind. So we must look at the proportion of schools attending the school from within the local community, whether the school is being otherwise used by the local community, and the overall and long-term impact on local people and the local community of any closure, and indeed the loss of the potential loss of the building as a community facility. Obviously, a key consideration which underpins this whole process and these considerations is whether the school is now surplus to requirements because there are surplus places elsewhere in the local area which might accommodate displaced pupils and for whom there's no predicted demand, and where there's no predicted demand for the school in the medium or long term. It is also the case, as I believe the appendices set out, that when undertaking a process in relation to rural primary schools, we must have regard to the 2006 Education Inspections Act and particular groups who must be consulted in addition to those who should be consulted in the case of a non-rural school. And those, for the record, are the registered parents of registered pupils at the school, any parish council for the area in which the school is situated, and any other interested organisation or person that the proposer, that being the local authority here, thinks appropriate. So I did think it important to set that out, Leader, as those are key considerations as we move forward. And I will now turn to the next appendix I would ask us to consider, and that is Appendix 4, which deals with the proposed closure of God's Hill Primary School. I will go through the document in the same way, but obviously highlighting different considerations that exist. The original proposal is summarised at the beginning of page 138. This proposal would remove 210 physical places, albeit 140 based on the current plan of the school. We know about the consultation process. I don't think I need to highlight that any further. And we then have summary of responses. There is a summary of the objecting comments appearing on page 140. Namely, overall, the comments reflect a strong opposition to the closure of God's Hill Primary School, with many highlighting the school's importance to the community, the quality of education it provides, and the practical challenges and emotional impact of the proposed closure. I would also seek to draw attention, as I promised I would do, to the summary, but appropriately lengthy summary on page 139, headed Previous Assurances, which relates to the, I think we can now say, infamous letter of the 29th of November 2022, which was sent to parents of Chillerton and Rookley pupils at that time. Again, I trust we have read through that summary, as indeed all the full comments that are in the full bundle we have been provided with. There was a public meeting that took place on the 2nd of October. The number I have, and if people want to dispute it, I'm not going to, but the recorded number of people in attendance was 65. As I say, that will relate to those who signed in. The online consultation feedback is summarised, starting at page 141. 476 responses, and it does show a very high figure not being supportive of 76% compared to 16% being supportive. And again, there's a summary of the content of those responses. There were 27 email responses, all of which were in opposition, together with formal responses from the head teacher, the chair of the governing body, the ward councillor, the God's Hill Matters group, and a joint response from four trade unions. There were two petitions, a paper petition containing 542 signatures and an online petition noted, it wasn't formally presented, but is noted, which contained 493 signatures as at the 29th of November. Again, there is an analysis of alternative options, and obviously there's been some discussion about that in questions which are asked earlier this evening. Each has been assessed, starting at page 147. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. The forecast data is presented for this school as others. In this case, it appears on page 152. And again, you'll see the figures, the 2028 figures appear at the bottom of page 152. I've sought just a moment ago to outline the considerations we must have in relation to this being a designated rural primary school. And in accordance with that, we have a detailed analysis of those considerations, starting off with alternatives to closure, a second analysis in that regard, starting at page 154. Those criteria which I sought to set out in that short speech are here further set out and detailed. And I trust we all have close regard to those. As with other reports, we also see housing data, commentary on deprivation, SEN provision, and commentary on impacts on other schools. And indeed, the usual analysis in respect of early years provision. Again, this is noted on page 162. There are, it must be said, some concerns in this area as highlighted, which would require the local authority to monitor this area and work with local providers in this regard. Lastly, and importantly, the inequality impact assessment, which is separately attached in the bundle, is referenced on page 162. Leader, however, with your leave, instead of pausing here, I would like to continue because I have an alternative to the recommendation that appears on page 163 that I would like to read, and that is this. When considering the heart of the island, we do not have enough children to maintain all of the rural schools with the rapid declining birth rate we are experiencing. Whilst the forecast reduction in pupil numbers does pose a future issue for the area, we as the council have taken serious consideration of the presumption against the closure of rural schools in this case. We recognise not only the community's desire to work with the council to provide a school in this area of the island, but also the strong voice of parents for this. God's Hill has good transport links with regular bus service, and if it remained open, would provide a school that reduces travel times for children and parents. After very careful consideration and having thoroughly considered the views of parents, it is my belief and my recommendation that retaining God's Hill at this time is in the best interest of our rural communities. And I would also like to say that I'm very conscious of the arguments that have been raised in relation to the Chillerton letter, if I refer to it like that. And whereas it might be considered ambiguous by some, it was certainly understood by many as giving an undertaking that parents could rely on. As such, I do not wish to put forward any substantive recommendation in relation to this school. I will be advised if it is formal that we should formally take a vote to remove God's Hill from the process at this stage, but I'd actually look to advice on that point. We should do that.
Councillor Bacon, given that you have a recommendation that was put in the paper and you are making an alternative recommendation, which is not to proceed, then my suggestion would be you make that recommendation not to proceed to close and take a vote on it, because then it formalises the whole decision. Excuse me.
That seems sensible, and I'm grateful for that advice. I therefore formally would propose that we do not, hang on, give us a chance, that we do not proceed with the proposed closure of God's Hill Primary School. And I look for a seconder.
Any comments or questions on this?
I would just like to thank all of you for listening and thank the parents and everyone that's worked very hard from all of the communities across the middle of the island. Thank you very much.
Just very quickly, Chair, I'm pleased at the decision, although God's Hill isn't in my ward. The informal links between Barton and God's Hill are absolutely important to the most deprived part of the island, considerably more deprived than anywhere else. If you look at the data regarding children arriving at Barton when they first go to school, so this is an important decision for my community, not only the rural areas of the Isle of Wight. Thank you to every member of the cabinet.
Chair.
Chair, before we go to the vote, perhaps for the record, I should also say and should have said in my summary that I would also like us to take account of the recommendation made by the Corporate Scrutiny Committee on the 10th of December, which you read out earlier, that irrespective of what comes out of full council, that Central Rural has educational provision in some capacity, and the Cabinet looks at whether that is through an amalgamation or revisiting an alternative proposal, and that the Chillerton letter is more heavily weighted in discussions as it is at the moment.
Thank you, Jonathan. There's no further comments, questions. We've had the recommendation. I'll do the same again. Those in favour, those against, and those abstain. So those in favour of the recommendation, sorry. That being 7. Those against, there are none. Those abstaining, there are none. That recommendation has been passed. Jonathan, please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. I now turn to the next appendix I would like us to consider, and that is Appendix 1 in respect of Arreton St George's Church of England Primary School. I think you'll get used to how I'm going to do this now. The original proposal is set out on page 44. This is to remove 210 physical places, albeit 140 based on the current plan from the school estate. The paper emphasises here, because I think this was an issue in this regard, that the future of the school site is not being considered, as I made clear generally, but I think it's worth specifically emphasising in relation to this school. Any future use of the site is not being considered by us today, and this should not be in members' minds when going forward. The consultation process is outlined as before with other schools. Objecting and positive comments are set out on pages 45 and 46. The objecting comments reflect a strong community attachment to Arreton St George's Church of England School and significant concerns about the broad implications of its closure on the local area, children's well-being and educational choices. There were positive comments which highlighted potential benefits of proposed school closure, focusing on improved education quality, better resource allocation, and long-term community benefits. There was a public meeting as recorded. It was noted that 38 people attended. Again, I assume that is signing in, although from being there, I think that's probably about right in that case. Online consultation feedback is summarised. In this case, it shows that the responses show 41% were supportive, 56% not supportive, so somewhat different to what we've just heard for Godshill. Email responses, there were, and that was of 198 responses, those percentages. 30 email responses were received, together with formal responses from the parish council, the head teacher, the governing body, and the trade union, joint trade union response. And there was a petition in relation to this school, which numbered 445 signatures. This, as with Oakfield School, which we considered earlier, is a Church of England school, and as such, a formal response, the formal response from the diocese, appears in our summary and is set out, and we have read it. It appears on page 51 and 52. Alternative options were suggested in this case. They appear commencing at page 53. We have to have regard to the fact, as with all these schools, that the fundamental issue we're looking to address is surplus places. Options 2 and 4 did seek to address that, but again, as can be seen, both had significant demerits. Forecast data appears on pages 58 and 59. Again, perhaps the most relevant table is that on page 59, the 2028 position. And you will see this is one of those tables where the figures are really quite stark in return, in respect of numbers predicted to be on the roll. Arreton, as with Godshill, is a formally designated rural school. And so there's a significant portion of analysis in the papers of those criteria, which I set out a little while ago, starting at page 60. I think it is clear that the analysis has been undertaken and we have read it. I will not take us through it piece by piece because it is there clear on the papers. I think one point of note that we must have regard to here is that, as is clearly noted there, only 12 children attend Arreton as their nearest school. As with the other reports, we have housing data, issues of deprivation, SEN provision, and commentary on the impacts of other schools. In relation to early years, there are currently no concerns, and we have the equality impact assessment summary, and again, that appears in full in the relevant appendix in the report. Perhaps again, Leader, I would pause there before moving on to recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Bacon. Are there any comments or questions? Councillor Stevens.
Just to note, the early years situation in Arreton, I think supports the number of pupils that are actually residents of Arreton. And I think that, you know, there's just low pupil numbers in both elements. So just wanted to make that known. I think that a lot of the, and looking at what we did have was not only this, but we had the maps with the areas of travel and what have you, and noting the number that came through, well, across the island to stop at Arreton, which probably, yeah, from the Bay Area, etc. Seemed like it was more a commuter route than going to school and doing the thing locally. So yeah, I think the data does support what you've said. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Ellis's question, please.
Thank you. I don't have a question. I think I've put forward my arguments for all of the schools in my ward and Councillor Downer's. Obviously, I'm very grateful for the decision on God's Hill, but I think this may be a different and difficult decision. But I have asked all my questions already, and I know that you have listened to them. So, thank you.
Councillor Ellis, they're all difficult decisions, all of them. Ashley.
Thank you, Chair. Just to refer to Councillor Stevens' points that he raised. So we do believe that regarding the early years provision, that proposals do allow the council to continue to deliver its statutory duties around early years provision. And it's absolutely right to raise the point about the numbers of families who live in close proximity to the school and the significant numbers of families who live at quite a considerable distance away. And again, this is one of the examples of where, until we understand, should the proposal go ahead, more about parental choice, about where they would want to go to school instead, it's difficult to be very exact about where they would go. And of course, in this example as well, there's also the element of the fact that it's an Anglican school, and some families may be attending there because that is their choice to attend a school like that. But actually, there may be another school which is closer to them that they would also be pleased to go to. So should the proposal proceed, we'll need to wait to find out more about parental preference. And that would depend, of course, on where those people live.
Yeah, sure. We're okay. Back to you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Leader. There's one point I apologise, I should have mentioned. There was some concern during the consultation process with the potential alternative school provision that was available. It may be this is something people want further comment from officers on, but there has been, I should report, liaison with Carisbrooke Church of England and Newport Church of England primary schools to hope to ensure that parents who do require a faith school can be offered a school place at those locations should that be required. I don't know if anyone wants any further detail on that.
Yeah, so just to reconfirm that was something that was a strong voice that we took forward, was around that actually some families were choosing to travel to that school due to faith. And so we have had that discussion with the head teacher of Carisbrooke Church of England Primary School and Newport Church of England Primary School, and subject to the demand for places, those schools would be work with us to accommodate additional children.
Councillor Stevens,
Can I-
I'll come to Councillor Brady after.
Can I add just something on that
Okay,
point as well?
please
So
do.
I think this for me is an example of where, because we have across the school estate, there have been a number of occasions where actually people have reduced their published admissions number. I'm talking not about Arreton School, but I'm talking about the way that children may be able to attend, you know, an alternative school of their choice. Because across the island's education estate, a number of schools have reduced their published admissions number so that the physical capacity of the school is actually considerably in excess of the current published admissions number. We have been working with colleagues, you know, across the school system to identify opportunities to actually reopen certain elements of that provision, which will result in children, A, being able to go to a school which does reflect parental choice, but also allows, because funding follows the child, that those schools would actually receive additional income for that. And that overall will lead to a more robust financial situation for schools, and governing bodies and head teachers will be able to access more money to invest in the resources they need to drive up education standards. And I think that's an example of it, isn't it, where the school in the past has reduced its published admissions number, but actually has more physical capacity on site for those children to go to school. And there are examples of families actually who live closer to that school, but currently travel to Arreton. It'll be up to them whether they want to decide to go there or not, and that will play out over time.
Can I come to you, Jeff? Yeah, okay. Councillor Brady.
Just a very quick remark, Chair, and thank you for letting me say. I think when the original paper came out, the alternative was my local school, Barton, which has been a consistently good school ever since the current head teacher took over. And there was some criticism of that from parents that I received, which I dealt with robustly, because Barton is a good school. Obviously, I appreciate that some people prefer to stay in a church school, but those who don't now do have the choice, thanks to the Cabinet, of going to God's Hill, you know, and addressing some of the problems there. But thank you anyway.
Councillor Stevens? No? Okay. Jonathan, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the recommendation is as follows. From reviewing and assessing all the information received through the consultation, the importance of access to a Church of England school is understood, as I hope we've said, as is the fact that this is strongly felt in the community. Therefore, as a result of this, it's part in red. Losing my words. So what I said earlier is actually contained in the recommendation. Therefore, as a result of this, the council has negotiated with Carisbrooke and Newport primary schools to provide additional school places for children currently attending Arreton, should these places be required. The council does not underestimate the potential impact of this proposed change on the children at the school whose circumstances may already make them vulnerable. It has been recognised that the school is a rural school and that its community stretches beyond the area the school sits within. Consideration has been made as to how children and families can be supported in any transition, so that the sense of community can be given the chance to be maintained. It is expected that this will happen through the scheduling of opportunities for children and families to come together through and beyond the transition phase, with the support of the Council's Children's Services Department. And I would also say, following what Councillor Brodie has said, that this recommendation also now takes account of the decision that this Cabinet has just made in respect of God's Hill School. The closure of Arreton Church of England Primary would reduce the number of surplus primary school places on the island and in the immediate planning area it is within. The council considers that allowing surplus places to remain at current level through inaction would directly and negatively impact the financial viability of many local schools, which in turn will have an impact on the quality and breadth of the education offered at those schools. Mapping of children by postcode demonstrates that they reside across a wide area within and outside of the Newport area, with only 16% of children in current year R to 5 attending the school as their nearest school. This means that families are very likely to have several alternative schools within the DfE recommended walking distance of their homes, and children would be entitled to local authority funded transport if they are eligible under the home to school transport policy to what becomes their nearest school if Arreton is to close. It is recognised that longer journeys to school may occur for some families living in the Arraton area if they take a place at a school further from their home address. And the council would work with schools who receive children from Arraton CE Primary School to develop their school travel plans to seek to mitigate against increased car use. With all that in mind, the recommendation to Cabinet is that a public notice be published in accordance with Section 15 of the Education Inspection Act 2006 to close Arraton St George's Church of England Primary School with effect from the 31st of August 2025. I look for a seconder.
Thank you, Jonathan. Do I have a second? That's Councillor Stevens has seconded that. Any further questions or comments? There are none. We'll move to the vote, and again, I will ask for a show of hands for those in favour, those against, and those who abstain. So those in favour, please show. 7. Yeah, we're registering my vote. There are 7 for. Those against. There are none against. Those who are abstaining, there are no abstentions. Therefore, that recommendation is also carried. Jonathan, will you press on?
We move now, sticking with the rural area, to Appendix 6 and Wroxall. So I will again go through the paper in the same way. The original proposal is contained at page 206. This proposal would remove 210 physical places from the Ventnor planning area, that being 175 based on the current PAN admission. The consultation process, I think we all know about by now. We then move to the responses, objecting and supporting comments. There were a number of comments reflecting opposition to the closure of the school, emphasising its importance to the community and the quality of education it provides, and other potential negative impacts of the closure. There were also positive comments in support of the proposal, which highlighted perceived benefits of closure and merging its children with other nearby schools with capacity. There was a public meeting. The recorded attendance was 53. Online consultation feedback, as with all the reports, is summarised. In this case, it shows there were 467 responses, 25% support and 62% opposition of those responses. And again, we have those fully summarised on the pages 211 to 12 of the report, and indeed into 213. 14 emails received, including, in addition, there were formal responses from the parish council, the head teacher, ward councillor, chair of the governing body, and a joint response from the trade unions. There was a petition in this case that attracted 394 signatures. In addition to the original proposal, alternatives were submitted, and as with all the individual reports on schools, those are set out and summarised, commencing at page 214. The assessment to each option then follows. Again, the guiding factor is the issue with surplus places on the island. Option 7 was the only suggestion which could have that impact. But the suggestion there, which is the reduction of PANs of other schools, has, as set out, significant demerits. It perhaps should be noted that the last option, I think option 8 actually, suggested the closure of St Francis Primary School. But as noted earlier, that being an academy, the local authority does not have the power to pursue that course. Forecast data appears in the report, and this is on pages 222 to 223. And again, makes stark reading when one looks at the table at the bottom of page 222, with the figure of 72 appearing there for that year. Wroxall is formally designated as a rural primary school, and hence, as we have seen from the two previous schools, there is a lengthy analysis of the criteria which I outlined must be considered in respect of a rural primary school. Again, I am not going to go through that in detail. It is set out, I think, fully. I know all those around the table have read it, and I think the messages there, the analysis there, I should say, is clear. Housing data, issues, deprivation, SEN provision, and impacts on other schools are highlighted. This is another area where there is some concern in relation to early years provision, which is set out at page 231. But again, this is something members may wish to have more information from officers about this, but as noted, this will be a feature that the local authority will monitor and work as necessary to address, bearing in mind the duty the authority has to maintain sufficient provision in this regard. Again, there is an equality impact assessment referenced in the analysis, and which we have seen in full elsewhere in the papers. Again, as with Arreton, I think we should also have regard, as I think appears in the various analysis, to the fact of a decision we have made shortly, a little while ago, in respect of God's Hill School, and the fact that there will now be ongoing provision at that site. Perhaps again, Leader, I should pause there, should there be questions on any of those matters that I've outlined.
Thank you, Councillor Bacon. Are there any questions? Councillor Downer, you're the ward councillor.
I'll reserve to speak after the recommendation, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Any further comments or questions? Julie.
Thank you. It was just, with regard to what Councillor Bacon said about the decision earlier about God's Hill and the travel. Again, I'm sort of quite interested in travel, and this obviously I'm thinking it enables children at this school to have less travel than on the table that's already in our papers. Potentially, obviously, parental choice is at the heart of it, of course.
So that's right. Given the previous decision, one of the factors which you've read about in the papers was the views that many parents raised around access to schools of different types in that area, and talking about how one of the schools, which is not a faith school, had relatively high numbers already, and their concerns around that. Given the previous vote around God's Hill, that does give opportunities for families in that area to use the good transport links to travel to a non-faith school, as opposed to go to the faith school, which is one of the other alternatives in that area. So, and as we heard earlier, one of the considerations was around the transport routes there, and how that God's Hill is on a transport route that families could access. So that's right.
Sort of thinking about keeping, children together that are already at school together, maybe, so it helps that community a bit more, and say more children going to God's Hill potentially could mean there's more money for the school trips, the extra stuff, more teaching staff, whatever's needed. So I was trying to sort of put that piece of news, the decision we made, school before last, just trying to now work out what that means for this school and as much positivity as is possible.
So, do you want to? Yeah.
So yes, so just for clarification, because I think there's been lots of questions asked about early years provision. So the data that's in the Appendix 6 is the headcount and that data and information is provided to the local authority by the preschool provisions, early years provisions themselves. So just to confirm, so the clarification for the comment from the public gallery is around, we did a presentation at the school and there was an incorrect figure within the presentation that was given. When this was noted to us, we undertook a correction and that correction was published. There is an online presentation.
We can't do this. We can't do this way.
So yeah, if you visit the iow.schoolplace website, the presentations that were given are uploaded to there, and there is a noted amendment on there that the incorrect figure was provided and the correct figure was noted on there, and we can provide that to you. So I think
no. We will get the number for you. Please don't shout out. I will get the number for you. I will get the number. That's.
Can I just say that in terms of the early years data, it will change termly, and it also changes in terms of when children come into the preschool. So it's a figure that's always changing, that data. But the data that we have here is the data that was provided by the providers, the early years providers inputted it into the early years portal in November to receive their funding before Christmas. So this is the most up-to-date data that we have, but it does change because it depends on early years children's movement across the island.
No, but that's the point. There is no opportunity now. That's the point. Look, I'm sorry, but that's how it works. We have heard. I can hear what you're saying. I understand your concerns. We're trying to answer that question in a difficult situation. The numbers that I'm hearing in our papers are considered correct, and well, that's what we're being told. They're correct now. We're also being told that they are movable from year to year, and I'm happy and confident that that information that's been given to us in this paper is now correct. I'll ask Ashley to comment as well, please.
Thank you. The point also, I think, two things. First of all, is that this process has been going on for some time, and one of the benefits of it is that information gets shared and people are able to challenge it and discuss it. And that's what happened in this in the consultation presentation, which happened back in September, or was it early October? And so that has been raised. It's one of the benefits of sharing information and being transparent. So all stakeholders have the opportunity to challenge that. The second thing is that I can give assurance to members that we do believe that the proposals allow the local authority to meet its statutory duties around the provision of early years places in this area.
Thank you, Ashley. Any further comments, Debbie?
Thank you, Chair. My question was on early years. It has been partially answered, but from the table, it looks, bearing in mind again, the decision that's been made over God's Hill, the God's Hill Griffins preschool, can I just have confirmation that that a conversation will be potentially had with them if parents should so choose? They're currently, it looks as if they're currently at capacity, whether or not there would be the option for them to extend in respect of any of the Wroxall Robins that wanted to go there.
It would be down to parental choice. again where they would like their child to go. The capacity is what they can have at one time. So on roll, they've got 26, but they could have more. So the capacity is about how many children they can have in the building at one time, but they can have more children on roll depending on sessions, because obviously children don't do full days in preschool. So yeah, we would have communications again, and we do data collections twice a year where we would gather all that information to ensure that there is sufficient duty.
Members might be interested to just know the scale of this change in data. So I'll read the correction which is published on the council's website. It says this: it was presented that Wroxall Robins had 13 children on roll, 1-3. This was incorrect information. The local authority can confirm that as per the preschool's August submission, they had 19 children on roll. So it was a difference of 6 children. Thank you.
Was that a typo or was that a genuine error of data collection? Typo. Thank you. I'll move to the recommendation if there are no furthers, and then I will ask Councillor Downer to comment or ask a question or speak.
And just following up that point, Chair, I think I recall a conversation that's had some time ago where that was discussed and it was stated that it made no material difference to the content of what followed. I believe that's correct. The recommendation, if I turn to that then, from reviewing and assessing all the information received through the consultation, the importance of Wroxall Primary School is understood, as is the fact that this is strongly felt in the community. It has been recognised that as a rural school, its community stretches beyond the area the school sits within. Consideration has been made as to how children and families could be supported in any transition, so that the sense of community could be given the chance to be maintained. It is expected that this will happen through the scheduling of opportunities for children and families to come together through and beyond the transition phase with the support of the Council's Children's Services Department. The Council does not underestimate the potential impact of this proposed change on the children at the school whose circumstances may already make them vulnerable. The closure of Wroxall Primary School would reduce the number of surplus primary school places on the island and in the immediate planning area of Ventnor. The Council considers that allowing surplus places to remain at current level through inaction would directly and negatively impact the financial viability of many local schools, which in turn will have an impact on the quality and breadth of the education offered at those schools. Through the consultation process, concerns were raised about the fairness of the process and inclusion of academies in the school place planning review. The local authority and the Department of Education have jointly approached the academies on the island to consider their positions, as has been noted already. Mapping of children by postcode demonstrates that they reside across a wide area within and outside of the Ventnor area, with only 37% of children in current year R5 attending the school as their nearest school. This means that families are very likely to have several alternative schools within the DFE recommended walking distance to their homes. Children would be entitled to local authority funded transport if they are eligible under the home to school transport policy to what becomes their nearest school if Wroxall closes. It is recognised that longer journeys to school may occur for some families living in the Ventnor area if they take a place at a school further from their home address. And the Council would work with schools who receive children from Wroxall Primary School to develop their school travel plans to seek to mitigate against increased car use. And as I think we've said before, we now also take account of the fact that God's Hill School is to remain open in accordance with the decision made earlier this evening. The recommendation in respect of Wroxall, though, is that a public notice be published in accordance with Section 15 of the Education Inspection Act 2006 to close Wroxall Primary School with effect from 31st of August 2025. And I look for a seconder.
Thank you, Jonathan. That's seconded by Councillor Andre. I will now ask Councillor Downer. He's asked to speak at this moment. I'm quite happy for him to do so.
Thank you, Chair. Well, it's finally happened. The third time. My wife fought like mad with others to keep Wroxall open when the middle schools closed. Then we had the threat last year and now it's finally happened. To say that I'm sad is an understatement. Both our daughters went there. My wife taught it, was in the preschool for 25 years. It's a caring school. It's taken loads of SEND pupils. And wow, I'm a bit speechless, really. After £2 million was spent on the place, what's it going to be used for now? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Rodney. We share your pain.
Chair, the fight goes on. I'm like a dog with a bone and I won't give up.
We would expect no less of you, Rodney.
Yeah, I would just say I very much hear what Councillor Downer says, but I would note, must be made clear that we cannot in these decisions take account of potential future alternative uses of the site. And I would ask people to bear that in mind as we go forward.
There is a recommendation and a seconder. I will ask for those in favour, those against, and those who abstain as before. It's been seconded by Councillor Andre. Those in favour of the recommendation. That is 7 supporting the recommendation. Those against the recommendation, there are none. Those abstaining, there are none. That recommendation is carried. Councillor Bacon.
Thank you, Leader. We move to the last school under consideration this evening. As contained in Appendix 2, this is the proposal in relation to Brading Church of England Primary School, and that Appendix 2, also considers a proposed reduction of the Bay Primary School PAN number and the establishment of a new 12-place resource provision. The summary of the original proposal appears on page 76, and the numbers are set out there. Overall, the proposal would be, depending on the PAN, etc. addition, to remove either 175 or 200 places from the planning area in total. What did I say? I'm sorry, 280. Thank you for correcting me. Again, this is one of those situations where I think there was some mention of alternative proposals, but this is not part of the consideration for us this evening. The consultation process is outlined on page 76, and then we move to the responses and the summaries in respect of that. The opposing comments are listed on page 77 and summarised over the page. Overall, the feedback reflects a strong opposition to the closure of Brading Primary School many emphasised the school's importance to the community and potential negative consequences of its closure. There are, however, supporting comments which are not separately summarised, but comment on improvement in use of resources and educational standards, as well as the availability of other schools. The figure recorded in attendance at the public meeting was 24. Having been there, I think it was a little higher, but again, that will reflect those who signed in. The online consultation feedback is summarised pages 79 to 83. It has to be noted, this is interesting, there are 164 responses, 55% were supportive. There were 26 email responses and also, and this relates to some comments that were made earlier at question time, 47 letters were received from children. We have received those, we have read them. There were also 15 interviews with parents, guardians and children. Formal responses were also received from the Town Council, the governing body, Brading Methodist Church, the Save Brading School Group, and a joint response from the 4 trade unions. I should note, and perhaps I should have mentioned this earlier, there was also a formal response from the Brading Community Partnership. I should indicate I am actually a trustee of that body, but it was mutually agreed that I stepped aside from involvement in any discussions and work that led to this representation. I would also like to note, though, that I have been available, albeit as a neutral assistant, throughout the process for anyone in Brading who wished to speak to me. And indeed, I did have a lengthy meeting with the lead member of the Save Brading School Group to offer such assistance as I was able in this rather difficult position. There were also 2 petitions. The first came through the Save Brading School Group. It contained 250 signatures. And we have another situation of an online petition that was not formally presented, but is noted. It contained 702 signatures. Brading is a Church of England school, and as such, there is a formal response from the diocese, which is set out on pages 84 through to 86, and we note that closely. There then appears in the document the consultation responses in relation to the bay. Perhaps I'll come back to that in a moment. Sorry, slightly confusing. Alternative options. Alternative options have been presented in respect of Brading. They are set out starting at page 91. I again make the comment, I'm afraid people are used to hearing it, that the key issue here is the reduction of surplus places in the system, and this was a key consideration. Options 6 and 8 did seek to, or do potentially offer that potential, but again, as can be seen in the analysis that is set out pretty fully on this document, both those 2 options have significant demerits. Forecast data appears for the school on pages 101 and 102, and again, as I've done with other schools, I perhaps specifically refer members to the table for 2028, which appears on page 102. This is the 4th of the rural schools that is before us this evening, and the analysis appears there at page 103 and onwards, and has been carefully considered and noted. Again, I think it is set out pretty fully. Obviously, there might be questions about that, but I'll leave that for a moment. Lastly, I think I should note that the usual paragraphs in respect of deprivation, special education needs, impacts on other schools, housing, and so on appear in the document. I did say I'd refer to the PAN consultation information again. That analysis, if we go back, appears at pages 86 to 90. The response was somewhat mixed, but there was good support for the proposed increased provision, I think it's fair to say. Leader, that's the summary of the documentation. And again, I think I should pause and before going to the recommendation, should there be questions?
Thank you, Councillor Bacon. Are there any questions? Councillor Brodie and then Councillor.
Chair, just a remark really. I mean, obviously it's nothing to do with my ward, but I have a responsibility as an Isle of Wight councillor anyway to have an overview. Earlier on, we had public questions asking to delay all of this process, etc. And quite rightly, in my view, you declined to do that. However, tonight you've made provisional decisions, and they're not final, provisional decisions on 4 schools that you will do the statutory notices on early in January. But I would like to ask you to defer this one, and I'll tell you why. Firstly, this entire process should have started a good 3 years ago, probably at the start of this administration, to be frank. 1 or 2 schools a year would have been a lot easier than this sort of big hit of up to 6 schools, now 5, hopefully 4 if you listen to me. The reason I say this in regard to this is that you've denied all the way through that the school planning areas are irrelevant. But I think it's very relevant in what I call the East Wight planning area. And it used to be an East Wight planning area from what I've been told before the current ones came in. And the East Wight planning area included Nettleston, St Helens, Brading and Bembridge. And everybody knows geographically, St Helens is not much more than a mile from Bembridge Primary School and not much more than a mile from Brading. And yet St Helens is well, let's say Brading and Bembridge are both in the Sandown and Shanklin area, despite being quite some distance from it. And then we have this mysterious ring fence around St Helens and Nettleston that nobody really understands. We don't have a rural separation in Newport, my town. You know, we don't class Wootton and now potentially closing Arreton as separate, and yet we have Ryde Rural, which is very mysterious to me. And I think you should really revisit that in regard to this. I do think that there's something not quite right about this, that you need to revisit that planning area and defer this till next year. Because there's no doubt in my mind that whomever is running this council in a year's time, they will be coming back to do at least 1 of the possibly 2 more schools. So it could be included in that. So you'll have made steps in the right direction to address school place surpluses. Perhaps not as many as you would have wanted, particularly since you've already pulled God's Hill, but you could pull this one as well. I hope that's a reasonably cogent argument, but it would settle some of the queries that I've had as a councillor in Newport from people in that area. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think that's right. Comment on that, please, actually.
I mean, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Brodie, for your question about that. Reiteration of a point that's already been made. So the development of these proposals has been ongoing for many months, certainly since about March, amongst the current team. But of course, the process has been going on a lot longer than that, indeed years. And so there has been considerable thinking and analysis over that time about these proposals and which schools could be chosen. the planning areas have not been used as part of that analysis. The analysis is based on a whole island analysis of where children live, how many children there are, and all schools. And as Councillor Bacon said earlier on in this meeting, there was a consideration about whether we should spend more time changing the planning areas, and the decision was that actually that wouldn't make any difference to the analysis of which schools are most appropriate to include in proposals, because the planning areas are not a contributing factor to that analysis. So as a result of that methodology, the planning areas have not determined which schools were in these proposals. They've been based on the whole island approach. And the example which I think is helpful to use to further explain why the planning areas have not been used and it would not have been appropriate to do so is because the very considerable number of families who live in one area of the island and choose to travel to a very different area of the island, often in a totally different planning area from where they live. And that is why we disregarded the planning areas in the analysis that we have been doing over many months about which schools to include in the proposals and which schools not to. So I don't think the planning area issue would have made any difference.
Thank you, Ashley.
Just very briefly, I'm not asking for a complete review of all the planning areas. I'm asking for a review of this mysterious Ryde rural connection with Brading and Bembridge. And I would refute absolutely the argument that the current school place planning areas have not been party to this. It's been the skeleton on which the flesh has been hung. The consultation document was done in chapters going through Cowes, East Cowes, Newport, Ryde, Sandown and Shanklin, Ventnor, West White. It was entirely about the school place planning areas. So if it wasn't done, presentationally, it was very poor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jeff. Right, hang on. Is there?
So the decision was to present the information in the planning areas because that's the way that some stakeholders, including the Department for Education, like to see things presented. And some people have said that they didn't feel that that was helpful, and other people have said that they thought it was helpful. It doesn't detract from the fact that the planning areas did not contribute to the analysis of which schools should be included or not, other than, for example, to show how they compare with where families live relative to where they choose to take their children to school. Although I accept that from a presentation perspective, some people have found that not as helpful as an alternative method of presentation might have been.
Thank you. Councillor Andre and then Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, when I was Cabinet Member for Education, we increased the resourced provision at Brading for special educational needs. I know part of the recommendation is to increase the resource provision at the Bay CE school, but what will happen to that resource provision at Brading should Brading close?
If I start off, and then one of my colleagues might want to contribute to this as well. So again, referring back to what the absolute focus of this analysis has been with these proposals, it's about mainstream primary school planning. That has been the overriding most important thing of it. It is true that we also, as a council, have a statutory duty to make sure that the needs of all children, including those children with special education needs and disabilities, have appropriate education provision. But in terms of the schools being identified for these proposals, that the only focus of that has been from a school place planning perspective for mainstream primary schools. what has driven it. Separate to that, we as a council have statutory duties around special education needs and disabilities, and we need to make sure that we have sufficient specialist places for those children, whether they be in specialist resource provisions or they be in special schools. But they are separate issues, but of course connected in some ways. I don't know if someone wants to add to that specifically to do with braiding.
So the resource provisions that we have across the island, we've set out it through our draft education strategy. We want a more consistent approach in terms of numbers and the provision that's in place within schools. So that is taking place, and we've had numbers of conversations with our current resource provisions. In terms of the resource provision that is at braiding, and the young people and the children that are in there, should the proposal go ahead, we will again ensure that an appropriate transition, similar to what we talked about earlier, will be in place with the children, the families, the schools, and making sure that they've got the right appropriate provision moving forward.
Thank you. Councillor Stevens.
Well, bit of a dilemma, not about east versus west, or Ryde isn't doing this, but Newport is. It's more about what we're trying to do here, which is raise the educational standards for our children, the opportunities. But I have to go a little bit towards where Councillor Brodie's coming from. I think looking at it, and it will probably come out if we move into a council meeting where it can be discussed further. But I just think that I've looked at this and read it and searched my soul a bit. I'll just bring it to page 85. I like those headlines, those bullet points down through from shall we say, the support that we give to those children at Brading, free meals, 41.2%. And I think that, you know, when we start to look, there might well be a negative impact on those families. And I look at the SEND provision, which is good. But then I also look at, we are talking about the threat, financial threat to our education system as well. This school, according to this financial health, the school has a healthy budget surplus, indicating its sustainability. I think there's room for debate there on this school, and I think it should be dealt with by 39 members of this council, putting forward what they feel and what they don't feel. That doesn't mean to say that I am not going to do the done thing and give the opportunity that, should we eventually move forward with a closure, then I reserve that right to make my vote tonight. But I think that there is an opportunity there for all 39 councillors in this Isle of Wight Council to revisit this school and start to look how it can impact on the community of Brading and indeed the pupils, but also assist us with the way that we're moving forward with our new education strategy. And I think this might be a positive, but that's to be debated and discussed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Councillor. Just a couple of comments on it. So it's true, using the most recently available public information on school finances, relative to some of the other schools, it is true that Brading, in terms of the cash it has in its bank account, is in a much healthier position than other places. It's also true that in this current financial year, the school's forecast back in the summer of this year was that in this financial year it would spend £147,000 more than it received in income. And I think for me, what that shows is this situation is developing very quickly. And as the numbers of pupils decreases quite quickly, the income to a school decreases very, very quickly. And the positive cash balances that some schools have, and indeed across the whole system, it is still net positive, but it's decreasing very quickly. It's important that, given the changing demographics and the reduction in the birth rate, that schools are able to identify a way of being financially sustainable long term. And the biggest driver of that is where children live relative to it, combined obviously with parental choice. So it is true that this school does at the moment have a healthier financial situation relative to others. But this year it has deteriorated very quickly. And the main driver of that would be the numbers of children attending.
Just briefly, just briefly. Understand, let's say, Ashley, but I still feel that there might be an area which, as we move forward, it should be open for discussion, as all the schools are. But I just feel that we owe it to what's presented to us to look at it and get a balance and a feel for it. And I think there's none better than a reasonable debate or a conversation within this chamber. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not quite sure where to go with this. Firstly, we'd need, do you want to, no, but we would need a proposal, we'd need a seconder, and so on. I'm wondering, as tonight isn't a final decision, whether we could still, yeah, okay.
Thank you, Chair. Bear with me a second. I agree with I agree with a lot of what Councillor Brodie says. I feel it rather unfortunate. This is the first time I'm aware that this specific suggestion has been raised in relation to this specific school. And I think that is unfortunate. This
did make it available to officers earlier this week.
I was speaking from a personal perspective, but I hear what you say. This is very difficult. I'm the ward councillor for this area. I've represented Brading, apart from a few years in the wilderness, for nearly 16 years. And it's a very special place. I did, however, say at the beginning of this debate, however many hours ago that was, that we have to approach this in an objective way. And I also note what Councillor Brodie says about us all having a duty as Isle of Wight councillors, alongside being ward councillors. And the reason I've been sitting here for most of this evening, putting forward very painful recommendations for many, most if not all, is the belief I have that we are doing the best for the future of island children, and therefore everyone overall. And I know it does not seem like that to many people, but that is a belief I have developed and strongly hold. I don't think I had that belief 18 months ago when we were first talking about an active process, but going through, taking on a different role, going through everything in great depth and detail and being helped by the team we have. It is a very deeply held belief now. I can't agree, Jeff, I can't agree with you on the allegation of the suggestion of a ring fence or some magic going on in relation to the planning areas and the effect of the planning areas. I've been involved in this process, and I know that they were not the basis of any decision. And I can appreciate why it might not appear like that, but I know that's not the case. I tried to give a clear explanation of that many times in the past months. I also think the case that we can't, it's not possible to review one area on its own, because as soon as you do that,